I slept with his mirror image. Revenge stories. It began with resemblance, the kind that felt less like coincidence and more like punishment. Mira Solano, 35, met Adrian Keats at a photography exhibition in Chicago. He stood beside a black and white portrait of a man staring into a mirror. His reflection blurred. When he turned, her breath caught. He looked exactly like Eli Navarro, the man who had broken her heart 3 years earlier and never apologized for it. The same dark hair, the same deliberate smile that made you believe you were being studied. But Adrian was softer around the edges, more restrained. He spoke slowly, as if choosing each word for its weight rather than its melody. When he asked her for coffee, she should have said no. She should have walked away from the déjà vu and the danger pulsing beneath it. But revenge, she'd learned, doesn't always arrive with a weapon, it comes disguised as curiosity. Their first night together felt like hypnosis. She studied his body the way a painter studies shadow, every contour, every echo of the man she once loved. He noticed, of course. "You look at me," he said, "like I remind you of someone you buried." She laughed it off, but the truth was too sharp to swallow. He wasn't Eli, but he was close enough to let her rewrite the story. She began to orchestrate it like art. The same music Eli used to play on Sunday mornings. The same whiskey he drank. The same cologne, because she bought it for Adrian without telling him why. When he wore it, she would close her eyes during sex and pretend she was back in the past, correcting it, reclaiming it. But Adrian wasn't naive. One night, as they lay tangled in the dark, he whispered, "You're not sleeping with me. You're trying to finish something unfinished." She froze. "You don't understand." He smiled sadly. "I understand perfectly. I've done the same." When she sat up, he handed her a photograph from his bedside drawer. It was Eli, her Eli, standing beside him, both younger. Their faces identical except for the expression. "He's my brother," Adrian said quietly. "Half-brother, technically. He told me about you once. Said you were the one who could never forgive." The room spun. The air thickened. For a moment, she wanted to scream, to run, to confess everything, but she didn't. She only said, "And what did he tell you about how it ended?" Adrian's eyes softened. "That you left him bleeding and never looked back." She laughed then, low, bitter, almost musical. He forgot to mention why. That night, she stayed. Out of defiance, maybe. Out of something darker. And when Adrian touched her again, it was slower. Deliberate, like they both understood the symmetry of their cruelty. The next morning, she found a note on the pillow. "He knew you'd find me. He wanted this. He wanted to know if you'd do it again." Her hands shook. There was an address written beneath it. Eli's. She stood in the bathroom mirror for a long time, staring at her reflection until her own face blurred into his. And for the first time since she'd started all of it, she realized she didn't want revenge anymore, she just wanted to know if either of them were real. That afternoon, she drove to the address. And when the door opened, she saw not one man, but two, identical, waiting. Both smiling. Both saying her name. By the second act, Mira Solano no longer knew which man she'd been punishing. The two brothers, Eli Navarro and Adrian Keats, had become indistinguishable. Not just in appearance but in voice, posture, scent. Her revenge had blurred into repetition, a loop she couldn't escape. They'd begun to trade places without warning, Adrian showing up at Eli's old haunts. Eli sending her cryptic messages from unlisted numbers signed A. She'd sleep beside one, wake to find traces of the other, an unfamiliar cologne. A sentence whispered that only Eli would say. She told herself she wasn't losing her mind, that this was still under her control. But control, she realized, is just revenge in costume. What she wanted wasn't closure, it was dominance over memory. And memory had started fighting back. One evening, Adrian invited her to a warehouse where he said he was developing a new photo series. The walls were lined with mirrors, some cracked, some pristine, each reflecting her face from a slightly different angle. It's called refractions of her, he said. A study of identity and illusion. In the center of the room, a projector flickered, displaying images of her, sleeping, driving, standing outside her apartment. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. Who took these? She demanded. He didn't answer. He just turned one of the mirrors toward her. And there was Eli's reflection instead of his. Same smile, same tilt of the head. She stumbled back. Which one are you? Eli, or maybe Adrian, smiled faintly. Does it matter anymore? That night, she ran. But the city itself seemed to carry their fingerprints, every reflection in a window, every voice in an alley. When she returned to her apartment, she found her own walls covered in Polaroids. Some were of her and Adrian. Others were of her alone. And a few were impossibly old, photos of Eli and her from years before. Scenes she'd burned and deleted. On the back of each, a phrase written in identical handwriting, "You're the reflection, not us." She tried to destroy them, burning one after another. But the images didn't fade, they distorted, the faces merging into one. The smiles identical and hollow. That night, she dreamed of a mirror she couldn't break. On the other side, both brothers stood hand in hand, whispering the same sentence over and over, "We only exist because you need us to." When she woke, her phone buzzed. A message. No sender ID. A single line, "Check the mirror." She turned toward it. There were 3 reflections staring back. By the third act, Mira Solano no longer trusted mirrors or herself. She had covered every reflective surface in her apartment with black cloth. But it didn't matter. She still saw their faces in the gleam of cutlery, in puddles on the street, in the black of her coffee. Eli Navarro and Adrian Keats had become interchangeable in her dreams, in her guilt, in her touch. Some nights she remembered lying beside Adrian, his breath steady, his kindness real. Other nights, it was Eli, sharp, mocking, his words curling around her like smoke. But when she woke, she could no longer tell which memories belonged to which man. Her revenge had folded in on itself. She'd meant to punish Eli by loving his mirror image. But now she wasn't sure which of them she'd ruined, or if either had ever existed. Then the emails began. Untraceable addresses. Short sentences, no subject lines. "You're getting closer. Stop deleting us. Look behind the glass." Each message arrived at 3:12 a.m., the same time stamped on the photographs Adrian had shown her. She unplugged her router, threw out her phone, disconnected from everything. But still the messages appeared, this time handwritten, slipped under her door, taped to her car windshield, left folded in her pockets. One night, she found a key taped to her bathroom mirror. No note. Just the key, and behind it, her reflection flickering slightly, as if the glass were breathing. She recognized the key's shape immediately. It belonged to Eli's old studio. The one he'd used for his darkroom before he'd vanished from her life. She hadn't been there in years. She told herself not to go. But at midnight, she was already there. unlocking the door with trembling hands. The air inside smelled of chemicals and damp wood. The lights flickered on automatically, revealing what looked like an installation, hundreds of photographs pinned to the walls, each one a variation of her face. Some weeping, some sleeping, some laughing with one of the brothers, though she couldn't tell which. And then she saw it, the final photo in the center of the room, larger than the rest. It showed her sitting in front of a mirror, her hands covering her face. A man standing behind her with his arms around her shoulders. But the reflection in the mirror showed no man at all, only her, smiling. Behind her, a voice whispered, "You've finally caught up." She turned, expecting to see one of them. Instead, she saw both, Eli on her left, Adrian on her right. They looked identical now, same expression, same eyes. "What are you?" she asked. "Completion," they said together. The lights flickered. For a second, the brothers blurred, their faces merging into one. She stumbled backward, hitting the mirror. It cracked, spider webbing outward, but the reflection didn't shatter. It smiled. The brothers stepped forward, their voices a single hum. "You didn't sleep with his mirror image, Mira. You made one." And as the lights went out, she saw it, her own face in the reflection, perfectly calm. Perfectly still, whispering back at her, "Now you're the copy." By the fourth act, Mira Solano had become something she didn't recognize, an imitation wearing her own skin. She barely spoke to anyone anymore. The city outside her apartment had dissolved into patterns of reflection. Every window a surveillance device, every shadow containing a face she'd already seen. Mirrors no longer needed to exist for her to see them. They had found new surfaces, computer screens, elevator doors. Even the dark glaze of her own pupils. Wherever she looked, Eli Navarro and Adrian Keats stared back, fused into one impossible presence. She tried therapy once. The psychologist, a soft-voiced woman with gold-rimmed glasses, asked her to describe her intrusive imagery. Mira said, "They're not images. They're rehearsals." The woman frowned, asked, "Of what?" Mira smiled without humor. "Of replacement." The therapist didn't schedule another appointment. That night, she returned to Eli's old studio, the one filled with photographs, and found it stripped bare. Every wall was clean, except for a single mirror hanging in the center. Its glass was fogged, as if someone had just breathed against it. On the surface, written in condensation, were the words, "We're not haunting you. You're remembering us." She pressed her palm against the glass. The surface was warm. For a moment, she saw movement beneath it, two silhouettes behind her, merging slowly until they became one. She turned, and there was no one. When she left, she caught her reflection in the window of her car. Her face looked different, her eyes sharper, her smile slightly tilted like Eli's. She touched her jawline and whispered, "Stop." But the reflection didn't move. It whispered back, "You started it." From that moment, the separation between them collapsed. Strangers began calling her by the wrong name. Old friends swore they'd seen her at places she'd never been, with a man who looked like her twin. One night, she received an email with an attached photograph. Two identical versions of herself, one leaning in to kiss the other. The caption read, "The image finally caught up." She tried to delete the file, but the photo appeared again the next morning, this time printed, laid gently on her pillow. She started dreaming in reflections. In one dream, she stood in an endless hall of mirrors, each one showing a slightly different version of herself, smiling, crying, bleeding, laughing, burning. In the farthest one, she saw Eli and Adrian watching her, hand in hand. "We're not real anymore," they said. "You made us mirrors. Now you have to decide which one stays." When she woke, her bedroom window was fogged with moisture from the inside. Someone had drawn two stick figures holding hands and an arrow pointing to a third figure in between them, labeled "you." She didn't leave her apartment for days. Food rotted in the kitchen. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls from unknown numbers. Each voicemail was the same, a recording of her own voice saying, "I slept with his mirror image, but I forgot who reflected first." Then one night the power went out. The city outside went dark, the silence heavy as breath. Mira lit a candle and walked to her bathroom. The mirror above the sink was uncovered. She couldn't remember when she'd removed the cloth. In the dim light, her reflection smiled first. And this time, it whispered her name, not like a warning, but like a lover reminding her that she had finally come home. By the fifth and final year, Mira Solano had stopped running from mirrors and started listening to them. They no longer showed her the world, they spoke it back. Her apartment had become a shrine to reflection, shards of glass pinned to the walls. Photographs of her face at different angles, all labeled with dates and coordinates. As if she were archiving the versions of herself that had survived each encounter. Outside, the city no longer felt like Chicago. It was a hall of mirrors disguised as a skyline, every window flashing fragments of her. She had given up trying to know which man was real. Maybe neither had been. Maybe both were just prototypes of her guilt, bodies she'd built to contain her own appetite for revenge. One night, she woke to a voice, hers but older, calmer. "You didn't sleep with his mirror image," it said. "You became it." The room was dark, except for a thin beam of moonlight hitting the largest mirror she hadn't covered. In it, she saw herself asleep, still, mouth half open. But the reflection blinked. Slowly, deliberately. She stood, trembling, and approached. "Which one of us is left?" she whispered. The reflection smiled, not mockingly, but with the tenderness of a confession. "You made me to end him. Now I end you." The glass rippled like water. She reached toward it, and her hand passed through. For a moment, she felt the impossible texture of herself, warm and endless, and then she was gone. Weeks later, police entered her apartment after neighbors complained of lights flickering at all hours. They found no sign of Mira. Only her walls covered in photographs and one final message written in lipstick on the mirror. "I finally forgave him. I became him to do it." But the investigators reported something else. When they covered the mirror for evidence, their breath fogged the surface. And a single sentence appeared beneath the condensation. As though written from inside the glass. "She's still here." The case was closed as a disappearance. But on certain nights when the moon hits the city windows just right, some claim they see her reflection passing between them, calm, expressionless, perfect symmetry. A woman who no longer knows whether she's avenging, forgiving, or simply existing in the reflection of the man she once destroyed. Because Mira didn't just sleep with his mirror image. She became the mirror itself, endlessly replaying, endlessly reflecting. Until the difference between punishment and identity vanished like breath on glass.